Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something pretty significant, a systems analysis of extreme wealth concentration.
Yeah, and specifically, we're looking at what seems like a major global anomaly. The dominance of the United States when it comes to the world's billionaires.
It really stands out, doesn't it? When you look at the basic numbers, it's kind of jarring.
It is. The U.S. has, roughly 4.2% of the global population, give or take.
About that, yeah.
Yet it's home to over 900 billionaires. That's nearly 30% of the global total. It just doesn't track proportionally.
Not at all. And, that initial number is just the starting point. Our mission today for you listening is to go beyond just the count. We want to analyze why the U.S. completely dominates the absolute peak of global wealth.
Right, the very top of the pyramid.
So we're going to deconstruct what our sources are calling the billionaire system stack. It's described as this unique three-part system.
Economic, legal, and even cultural mechanisms all working together.
Interlocking, you mean?
Exactly. They seem almost engineered to do three key things. First, to, incubate and fund these massive, globally dominant companies, pillar companies, as the analysis calls
So
it.
step one, create the giants.
Step two, efficiently convert the ownership, the equity in those companies into enormous liquid public valuations. Turn paper into recognized fortunes.
Right. Make it count on the global stage.
And step three, maybe the most critical, is to protect that wealth. Shield it from taxes, shield it from dilution, essentially ensuring it can become dynastic wealth.
So the big message here for you is, this isn't just random chance. It's not simply a large economy doing its thing.
No, the argument is that this level of concentration is the direct intended output of a uniquely synergistic system, a system that, frankly, doesn't seem to exist in its complete form anywhere else.
Like it's custom built for this result.
Okay.
Let's unpack that. Let's start with the scale, maybe. Just how dominant is the U.S.?
Okay, to really grasp the scale, it helps to think about it in two tiers. It's not just about having more billionaires.
Right. There's quantity and then there's quality or concentration.
Exactly. Tier one is the quantity comparison we touched on. The U.S. leads with, let's say, 902 plus billionaires.
Which is already a huge number.
It is, but compare it to, say, China, second largest economy, right? They have around 450 billionaires. In India, about 205.
Okay.
Now, combine China and India. Together, that's about 721 billionaires. But remember, their combined population is something like 8 times the U.S. population.
Wow. So even combined with vastly more people, they still trail the U.S. significantly in raw numbers.
Significantly. But tier two is where the U.S. system's uniqueness really shines. We call it the apex monopoly.
Very, very top.
Yes. When you look at the absolute wealthiest individuals on the planet, the $100 billion club and up the U.S. dominance is almost total. Our analysis confirms 14 of the world's 15 wealthiest people are American.
14 out of 15. That's almost unbelievable.
It really highlights the concentration. We're talking fortunes of a scale never seen before. And consider this. China, despite its economic size, has 0 people in the global top 20.
Zero.
Which strongly suggests that whatever wealth creation engine China has, it's not producing fortunes on the same colossal scale as the U.S. system. There's a ceiling there.
And this difference shows up in the total value, too, right? Not just the number of people.
Absolutely. Value concentration. The U.S. billionaires, making up about, say, 34% of the global total number of billionaires,
Good.
they control around $5.8 trillion in combined net worth.
$5.8 trillion. And the global total?
The total pool of wealth held by all billionaires worldwide is estimated around $13.4 trillion.
So let me get this straight. 34% of the people hold nearly 40% of the total wealth.
Exactly. That gap tells you something crucial. On average, a U.S. billionaire is substantially wealthier, holds more assets than their counterparts in Europe or Asia.
They're not just more numerous, they're bigger.
Financially speaking.
They're operating at a different altitude. The scale is just different. Okay, so the outcome is clear. Overwhelming dominance, both in numbers and especially at the very top. Now let's get into the how. How is this built? Stage one of the system stack. The engine of creation.
Right. Stage one is all about ignition. How do you actually generate these massive fortunes? It involves incubating companies, funding them, and then critically getting them assigned these gigantic valuations that turn founders into billionaires seemingly overnight.
And the bedrock for that whole process, you argue, is the U.S. capital market. The valuation engine.
Yeah, the U.S. capital market is often called the global engine of liquidity, and for good reason. It's incredibly efficient at matching capital from everywhere: institutional funds, sovereign wealth, pensions with businesses that can use it productively. More efficient than anywhere else, really.
And that efficiency is key, because a billionaire's wealth isn't sitting in a vault somewhere.
Absolutely not. It's almost entirely conceptual, in a way. It's tied up in equity shares of the public companies they founded or still control. Think Tesla, Amazon, Meta.
So their net worth fluctuates daily with the stock price.
Precisely. Their fortune is a direct reflection of the stock market's valuation of their company. It's not about salary. It's the ticker symbol that matters.
And the sheer size of the U.S. market seems critical here.
Immense depth. That's a huge advantage. The total value of the U.S. stock market hit something like $46.2 trillion in 2023.
46 trillion.
And it's roughly tripled in just 2 decades. That scale is unparalleled. And what that depth allows is for companies to achieve public valuations like the trillion-dollar market caps we see that smaller, less liquid, maybe less trusted markets elsewhere just can't support.
So the size of the market puts a ceiling on potential individual wealth in other countries.
It absolutely does. You need that massive liquid market to sustain multi-hundred-billion-dollar individual fortunes tied to company valuations.
And this scale, combined with who owns the stock, creates this feedback loop, the concentration feedback loop. How does that work?
It's a powerful self-reinforcing cycle. Starts with ownership concentration. The data suggests the richest 10% of U.S. households own something like 93% of all U.S. stocks.
Yeah, 93%.
Wow. And the richest 1%. They hold an estimated $25 trillion in equity. A massive pool of capital.
So the wealthiest already own almost everything.
Pretty much. And that huge pool of concentrated capital gets reinvested primarily into the biggest, most dominant corporations, the Apples, Nvidias, Amazons of the world.
Which have been delivering huge returns.
Exactly. We've seen years recently with total returns on U.S. stocks exceeding 25%. So these massive gains flow back disproportionately to the top 1% who own the bulk of the stock.
So a stock market boom doesn't lift all boats equally. It makes the top exponentially richer.
Exponentially, it widens the gap, and crucially, it refills and expands that capital pool at the top, ready for the next round of investment. The cycle feeds on itself, driving markets higher and concentrating wealth ever more efficiently.
Okay, so that's the engine that assigns the value. But where does the fuel come from? How do these companies get big enough to tap into that engine? That brings us to venture capital, right? Hashtag ABD, the venture capital catalyst.
Right. Venture capital, or VC, is arguably one of the most potent U.S. innovations in wealth creation. It's more than just rich individuals funding ideas. It's about institutionalizing high-risk investment.
Institutionalizing risk. How so?
Well, it really took off in the mid-20th century with firms like ARDC, American Research and Development Corporation. They started sourcing funds not just from wealthy families, but from investment trusts, university endowments, places like MIT.
So it wasn't just personal fortunes anymore. It was institutional money, specifically earmarked for risky ventures.
Exactly. That structure allowed places like universities and pension funds to allocate a small portion of their assets to these high-risk, potentially high-reward bets. That institutional backing became the bedrock of Silicon Valley.
And the VC model itself is unique, isn't it? Like a search engine.
That's a good way to put it. VC operates like a high failure rate search engine hunting for killer companies. They fully expect most of their investments, maybe 9 out of 10 or even more, to fail or just return the initial investment.
Failure is part of the business model.
It's baked in. The entire model depends on finding that one home run, the next Google, the next Facebook. That one massive success generates profits so large it covers all the losses from the failures and still delivers incredible returns to the fund's investors.
And this approach, focusing on potential blockbusters, really drives innovation.
Studies suggest it does. VC funding is estimated to be 3 to 4 times more effective at fostering truly disruptive innovation compared to traditional corporate R&D departments.
Why is that?
Corporate R&D often focuses on incremental improvements to existing products. VC is explicitly looking for the next big thing, the disruption that creates entirely new markets or upends existing ones. It's designed for exponential growth.
Which leads directly to how new billionaires are minted, the VC to IPO pipeline.
That's the key mechanism. VC identifies a promising, risky startup. They provide the funding, the expertise, the network to help it scale rapidly. Then comes the exit, usually the initial public offering, the IPO.
The IPO is the moment it connects to the big engine.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The IPO takes this private, rapidly growing company and plugs it directly into that $46 trillion public valuation engine we talked about. Suddenly, the founder's shares, previously illiquid and hard to value, are assigned a massive public market price.
Creating instant paper billionaires.
Instant multi-billionaires in many cases. When you look at the names at the very top of the U.S. wealth list, Musk, Bezos, Page, Brin, Zuckerberg, Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, they are all direct products of this uniquely American two-stage process. VC incubation, followed by massive public market valuation, #C, the corporate wealth nexus.
So the engine seems to be primarily tech-driven right now.
Overwhelmingly. The current wave of U.S. billionaire dominance is fundamentally tied to U.S. technology dominance. The value created by Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Meta, NVIDIA, it's staggering.
So global corporate dominance translates directly into global billionaire dominance because the founders own the stock.
Exactly. Their fortunes are literally the market value of these globally dominant U.S. tech firms. But there's a secondary factor, too, especially in established companies: C-suite compensation.
The huge executive pay packages.
Yeah, it's another concentration mechanism, maybe at the 0.1% level rather than the absolute apex founder level. CEOs at the top 350 U.S. firms average something like $27.8 million in compensation in 2023.
27 million average.
Average. And a lot of that is stock options and equity awards, tying their compensation directly to that public market valuation engine again.
And the ratio compared to workers is just mind-boggling.
It's around 399 times the pay of a typical worker in their company. That ratio was maybe 20-1 back in the 1960s.
Wow.
So this C-suite wealth extraction, while distinct from the founder phenomenon, also relies on high stock valuations and acts as another powerful force concentrating wealth at the very top.
Okay, so we have this incredibly powerful engine for creating massive fortunes, fueled by VC and amplified by the stock market.
Yeah.
But creating it is only half the story, right? You have to keep it.
Absolutely. That brings us to stage 2, the fortress of preservation. How do you protect these fortunes once they exist? This stage is all about the legal and tax architecture. How do you ensure that these 11-figure fortunes aren't significantly diminished by taxes, allowing them to compound and endure? The U.S. system seems uniquely effective at this.
And the core principle seems to be this idea of a dual tax system in practice. #A, the dual tax system.
Functionally, yes. It's not written this way explicitly, but the U.S. tax code effectively operates as two different systems. System 1 is for labor income.
Wages, salaries, bonuses.
Yeah.
Money you earn from working.
Right. That income is taxed progressively. The rates climb as your income increases, up to a top federal rate of 37%. But when you add state, local, maybe payroll taxes, the effective rate for high earners can easily hit 45% or even more.
That's the system most people live in.
Yes. But the ultra-wealthy, particularly the billionaires whose wealth comes from assets, they operate almost entirely in System 2, capital income.
Income from investments.
Exactly. Primarily long-term capital gains, the profit you make selling an asset like stock that you've held for over a year. That's taxed at a much lower preferential rate, maxing out at 20% federally. Dividends often get this preferential rate too.
So by having wealth in assets rather than salary, they access a lower tax system.
Fundamentally, yes. They structure their financial lives around asset appreciation, not wage income, which dramatically lowers their effective tax burden compared to high-earning professionals.
And the real-world results, the actual tax rates billionaires pay, are incredibly low.
They are strikingly low. One White House study looked at the wealthiest 400 billionaire families and found their average federal individual income tax rate was just 8.2%.
8.2%, less than many middle-class families pay in federal income tax.
Significantly less. And then there was the ProPublica investigation, which took a slightly different approach, calculating a true tax rate based on the growth in wealth, not just reported income.
How did that compare?
Even lower. They found the 25 richest Americans paid a true tax rate of just 3.4% on something like $401 billion in wealth growth between 2014 and 2018.
3.4%. That's almost nothing on that scale of gain.
It's the ultimate proof that the system privileges capital gains, especially unrealized gains over labor income. They structure things to avoid generating traditional income whenever possible.
Which brings us to the specific strategy they use to live off this wealth without paying tax. The buy, borrow, die doctrine. This sounds crucial. #B, the buy, borrow, die doctrine.
It is. It's described as the perfectly legal 3-step operating manual for achieving essentially infinite tax-free compounding and transfer of dynastic wealth?
Okay, let's break it down. Step 1, buy and hold. Why is simply holding the asset so powerful?
This is the absolute cornerstone. Under U.S. tax law, when an asset you own, stock, real estate, art, increases in value, that gain is unrealized until you sell it. And unrealized capital gains are simply not taxed, full stop.
So if I bought Amazon stock for $10,000 and now it's worth $10 million, as long as I don't sell it, I owe zero tax on that $9,990,000 gain.
Zero tax. That wealth can compound year after year, decade after decade, completely sheltered from income tax. You're sitting on a massive growing fortune, but haven't triggered a taxable event.
But people need money to live,
That's
right?
right.
Even billionaires, they can't just sit on stock forever if they want to buy things, but selling triggers the tax.
Right.
So, step 2, borrow.
Exactly. Since selling is tax inefficient, they don't sell. Instead, they go to a bank and use their massive portfolio of appreciated assets, those stocks worth billions as collateral, to take out huge loans.
And banks are happy to lend against that kind of collateral.
Oh, absolutely. Lending against billions in blue chip stock is very low risk for the bank. They offer very low interest rates.
And the key tax point, why isn't that loan money considered income?
Because legally, borrowed money is debt, not income. So the billionaire receives potentially tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in cash from the loan proceeds.
Tax-free.
Completely tax-free. And they use that cash to fund their lifestyle, mansions, yachts, private jets, operating expenses, whatever they want. They live off the borrowed money.
While their actual fortune, the stock portfolio, continues to grow in the background, also tax-free.
Precisely. They get the economic benefit of their wealth, the ability to spend without incurring the tax liability of selling. They're living on debt secured by appreciating assets. It's genius, in a way.
Okay, so they buy and hold to avoid tax on the growth. They borrow to get tax-free cash. What's the final step? Step 3, die.
This is the final piece that makes the whole strategy dynastic. It involves a specific provision in the U.S. tax code called the step-up in basis at death.
Step up in basis. How does that work?
When the individual who owns the appreciated assets dies, those assets are passed on to their heirs. At that moment, the step-up rule automatically applies. The original cost basis of the asset, what the deceased person initially paid for it, is legally erased.
Erased.
Wiped clean. It's replaced with a new cost basis, which is the fair market value of the asset on the date of the owner's death.
So, back to my $10 million Amazon stock example, originally bought for $10,000. If I die and leave it to my kids, their cost basis isn't $10,000.
No, their cost basis instantly steps up to the $10 million market value at the time of your death.
Which means?
Which means the entire $9,990,000 capital gain that accumulated during your lifetime is permanently forgiven by the tax code. It vanishes, never taxed.
And the heirs can then sell the stock immediately.
They could sell it the next day for $10 million and pay absolutely zero capital gains tax because their basis, $10 million, equals the selling price, $10 million.
Wow, that's not a loophole. That's a fundamental feature, ensuring capital gains are never taxed if held until death.
It essentially makes the capital gains tax entirely optional for wealth held across generations. It's arguably the single most important provision enabling the accumulation and transfer of vast dynastic fortunes in the U.S.
An incredible mechanism. So buy, borrow, die handles the income tax side. But what about the estate tax? Isn't that supposed to tax large inheritances?
It is, in theory. But that brings us to stage 3, securing intergenerational transfer. This is about neutralizing the final potential threat to the estate tax. The federal estate tax, sometimes called the death tax, is designed, at least on paper, to limit the concentration of wealth across generations. But in practice, particularly in the U.S., it's been significantly weakened. Some analysts even call it a voluntary tax for the ultra-wealthy.
Voluntary? How can it be voluntary? Mostly due to the high exemption amount.
That's the first line of defense for most wealthy families. The federal estate tax exemption is incredibly high. For 2025, it's set at $13.99 million per person.
$13.99 million. So a married couple can pass on almost $28 million completely tax-free.
Exactly. $27.98 million tax-free. Because the exemption is so high, the vast majority of estates owe nothing. Back in 2019, data showed only about 8 out of every 10,000 estates filed were actually large enough to be subject to the tax.
So for anyone below, say, $28 million, the estate tax is basically irrelevant. But billionaires are way above that threshold. How do they avoid it?
They employ sophisticated legal tools, often set up years or decades in advance. It's a whole industry of specialized wealth planning. Trusts are absolutely central.
Trusts. How do they work to avoid estate tax?
By moving assets into certain types of irrevocable trusts, The billionaire legally removes those assets from their personal estate. The trust becomes the owner, and since the billionaire no longer legally owns the assets when they die, they aren't counted as part of the taxable estate.
Even though the family might still benefit or control the trust.
Often, yes, depending on how the trust is structured. Things like ILITs, irrevocable life insurance trusts, are common. You put a huge life insurance policy inside the trust. When the person dies, the massive payout goes into the trust outside the taxable estate, often benefiting heirs tax-free.
And CRTs, charitable remainder trusts.
Those allow a person to donate assets to a trust, get an immediate income tax deduction, maybe receive income from the trust for life, and the assets are removed from their estate. Eventually, the remainder goes to charity, but the estate tax is avoided on the principal. Research suggests more than half of the 100 wealthiest Americans use these kinds of specialized trusts.
So trusts are a major tool. What else? Gifting.
Strategic gifting is another key tactic. There's the annual gift exclusion for 2025. You can give $19,000 per year to as many individuals as you want, completely tax-free, without using up your lifetime exemption.
So a couple with 4 kids and 10 grandkids could give substantial amounts each year.
Easily. 19 died 2 people, 14 recipients equal $532K per year. But the bigger tool is the lifetime gift tax exemption, which is unified with the estate tax exemption. That same $13.99 million per person.
So you can choose to use that exemption to make large gifts during your lifetime, reducing the size of your eventual taxable estate.
Precisely. You can transfer significant wealth to heirs tax-free before you die. And finally, there's strategic philanthropy.
Setting up family foundations.
Exactly. Donating assets, often highly appreciated stock, avoiding capital gains tax, again, to a private family foundation, achieves several goals. You get a large charitable income tax deduction. The assets are removed from your taxable estate. And critically, the family typically retains control over the foundation and its assets, directing its investments in charitable giving for generations.
So the wealth stays under family influence, avoids taxes, and generates positive PR.
It's a trifecta. The Walton family is often cited as a prime example of executing this intergenerational transfer flawlessly.
Sam Walton and Walmart, how did they manage it?
Decades before his death in 1992, Sam Walton took deliberate steps. He placed the vast majority, about 80% of the family's Walmart stock, into a family partnership called Walton Enterprises.
Wow.
Then he distributed ownership stakes in that partnership, essentially 20% each to his 4 children. So when Sam died, most of the immense Walton fortune was already legally owned by his children via the partnership. It wasn't part of his personal estate.
Clever. So it passed largely untouched by the estate tax.
Largely untouched. It cemented the dynasty and kept control of Walmart within the family, demonstrating the power of long-term, sophisticated estate planning using these tools.
It really does sound like an impenetrable fortress. Creation, preservation, perpetuation. Which raises the big question. If this system is so effective, why haven't other major economies like China or India managed to replicate it and produce billionaires at the same apex level?
That's the core question, really. And the analysis suggests it's because they lack the complete synergistic system stack. They might have parts of it, a large economy, growing markets, but not the seamless integration of all 3 stages. Creation, preservation, and perpetuation, all operating under a supportive cultural framework.
Okay, let's look at the main rivals, China first. What's holding them back from reaching that absolute apex? You mentioned a political ceiling.
The fundamental difference lies in the power dynamic. In the U.S., wealth often translates into significant political influence, lobbying power to shape the rules. In China, the dynamic is reversed. The Communist Party of China, the CPC, holds ultimate sovereign authority over everyone, including billionaires and the entire private sector.
So the party is always supreme.
Always. And this isn't just theoretical. We've seen it in action with policies like the Common Prosperity Drive.
Which sounds good, but the interpretation is different.
While presented as tackling inequality, analysts widely see it as a campaign to reinforce the party's control over the private sector, ensuring business aligns with political goals. It involves the state actively intervening to reasonably adjust excessive income, which means wealth accumulation itself can become a political risk if it's perceived as challenging party authority or priorities.
And the crackdown on the tech sector was a prime example.
Absolutely. Think about Jack Ma and Ant Group. The government stepped in and canceled what would have been the world's largest IPO, $37 billion, literally at the last minute in 2020.
A huge intervention.
It sent a shockwave. The message was clear. No individual, no company can accumulate wealth or influence that the party perceives as a potential threat or independent power base. This kind of direct political pruning, as some call it.
Puts a hard ceiling on how big private fortunes can get.
It absolutely does. Investors have to price in that political risk. Valuations get suppressed because success beyond a certain point attracts potentially negative state attention. It leads to things like forced donations to state causes, acting like an informal tax.
And it probably encourages wealthy individuals to move money out.
Definitely. It incentivizes capital flight among China's elite, seeking safer havens for their assets outside the party's direct reach. So this political ceiling is a major structural barrier preventing Chinese billionaires, despite their numbers, from reaching that U.S.-style apex wealth.
Okay, so China faces political limits. What about India? It's a democracy growing fast. Why aren't they challenging the apex? You called it a developmental ceiling.
India's challenges are different, more structural and infrastructural at this stage. Yes, it's democratic and it has over 200 billionaires, which is significant, but the source of that wealth is often different.
How so?
Wealth creation in India is still heavily concentrated in more traditional capital-intensive industries, things like pharmaceuticals, chemicals, manufacturing, infrastructure, energy. These are important sectors, but they generally lack the kind of exponential, almost physics-defying growth potential you see with US-based software platform and AI companies.
They lack that great multiplier effect from technology.
Largely, yes, that's one factor. Another is the financial infrastructure itself. India's stock market is growing rapidly, but it's still smaller, less deep, and less diverse than the U.S. market.
Less liquidity to support those mega valuations?
Exactly. It doesn't have the same capacity to absorb huge IPOs or sustain trillion-dollar market caps yet. Foreign investment flows are crucial, but the market is still seen as more volatile and often takes its cues from the U.S. market anyway.
And crucially, they don't have that Silicon Valley pipeline.
That seems to be a major missing piece. That hyper-efficient, risk-embracing VC to IPO pipeline that constantly generates new tech giants in the U.S. isn't nearly as developed or institutionalized in India. Add in other structural hurdles like historical protectionism, complex regulations, what some describe as an opaque tax system, and the overall system isn't yet geared to consistently manufacture or sustain those 11-figure apex fortunes on a global scale.
So the economic engine and legal framework aren't fully optimized for apex wealth creation and preservation yet.
Not in the same integrated way as the U.S. stack, which brings us to the final layer, something that's maybe less tangible but still critical, the cultural element. Hashtag check ABC key. The cultural propellant.
Right. You mentioned culture as the third leg of the stool. How does American culture specifically fuel this billionaire system?
The argument is that the economic and legal hardware we've discussed is supercharged by a unique cultural software, specifically the enduring ideology of the American dream.
The idea of meritocracy, self-made success, entrepreneurship.
Exactly. There's a deep-seated cultural celebration of the entrepreneur, the innovator, the risk-taker. Starting a company, even if it fails, is often viewed differently than in many other cultures.
How so? Less stigma attached to failure.
Generally, yes. There's a greater societal acceptance, even encouragement, of high-risk, high-reward ventures. Startup failure is often framed as a valuable learning experience, almost a badge of honor on the path to eventual success. It's seen as survivable.
Whereas in other cultures, stability might be prioritized more.
Right. In many parts of Europe or Asia, cultural norms might favor more linear career paths, prioritizing stability, prestige within established corporations or government service. A major business failure could be seen as more damaging personally and professionally.
And this American acceptance of risk directly fuels the VC pipeline.
It absolutely does. It ensures a continuous supply of ambitious, often highly educated individuals willing to forego safer paths and take enormous personal and financial risks to pursue a potentially world-changing idea.
They're willing to roll the dice to build the next Google or Amazon.
That cultural mindset guarantees that the front end of the system stack the VC funding. The innovation engine never really runs short of fuel. It keeps the creation stage churning out potential pillar companies.
So it's the combination. The economic engine, the legal fortress, and this cultural propellant all working together.
That's the core argument for why the U.S. system is so uniquely effective at producing and preserving apex wealth.
Okay, this brings us to a really interesting question about the nature of this wealth. We see this powerful system. Is the wealth it generates mostly new wealth, created by founders, or is it mostly old wealth, preserved through inheritance?
The analysis suggests the system is actually incredibly effective at both. To understand this duality, the Forbes self-made score is a useful framework. Remember, 1 means purely inherited wealth. 10 means rags to riches, built from nothing.
Right, so where does the current U.S. billionaire list fall on that spectrum? Let's start at the very top, the absolute apex, say, the top 10 or 11.
That group is overwhelmingly dominated by new wealth. These are almost all first-generation founders of the tech and finance giants that define the modern economy. Think Musk, Ellison, Bezos, Zuckerberg, Page, Brin, Jensen Huang.
Their fortunes were created relatively recently.
Mostly within the last, say, 10 to 40 years. And their self-made scores reflect this.
Give us some examples.
Well, Larry Ellison, co-founder of Oracle, he famously grew up poor in Chicago, raised by adoptive relatives. He's typically rated a score 10. Total self-made story.
Okay.
Jensen Huang of NVIDIA immigrated to the U.S., co-founded the company whose chips are now powering the AI revolution. He's often rated a 9 or 10. Again, fortune built from the ground up through the company he started.
What about the others, like the Google founders or Bezos?
They often score around an 8. People like Bezos, Zuckerberg, Page, Brin, they generally came from educated middle-class or upper-middle-class backgrounds.
So not rags to riches, but not inherited either.
Exactly. Bezos famously got about $250,000 as an initial investment from his parents. Zuckerberg got around $100,000 from his family early on. These were helpful seeds, no doubt. But the billions they possess today didn't come from inheritance. They came directly from the equity they held in the incredibly valuable companies they co-founded and took public via that VC to IPO pipeline.
So the very peak of U.S. wealth is largely founder-driven new wealth.
Generated by stage 1 of the system stack, the engine of creation. It confirms the U.S. system is unparalleled as an engine for minting new mega fortunes.
But what about further down the list? Below that absolute founder peak, that's where the inherited wealth comes in, the dynastic floor.
That's where you see the power of stages 2 and 3, preservation and perpetuation, really clearly. You find the beneficiaries of fortunes built in previous generations now expertly preserved.
Like the Waltons.
Perfect example. Alice, Jim, and Rob Walton consistently score a 1. Their wealth comes directly from inheriting stakes in Walton Enterprises, the family partnership Sam Walton set up specifically to bypass the estate tax.
Pure inheritance.
Pure inheritance. Same for Julia Koch and her family, also score 1s. They inherited a 42% stake in Koch Industries after David Koch passed away.
Although it's interesting, Charles Koch scores higher, right? Like a 4 or 5?
Yes, because while he and David inherited a successful business from their father, they then took that foundation and massively expanded Koch Industries into the behemoth it is today, America's second largest private company. So there was significant value creation on top of the inheritance.
Okay, so pulling it all together, what's the synthesis?
The synthesis is that the U.S. billionaire system stack is fundamentally dual-natured. It is simultaneously the world's most powerful engine for creating new, self-made fortunes at the absolute apex, primarily through tech innovation and finance. And it is also the world's most sophisticated and effective legal fortress for preserving and perpetuating old, inherited wealth, ensuring dynasties endure through stages 2 and 3.
Creator and preserver working in tandem.
Exactly. Which leads us to think about the overall impact and the future. #tag outro.
Okay, let's recap. We've explored this concept of the billionaire system stack.
Yeah, this 3-stage process. Stage 1, creation, powered by that unique combination of VC funding, the IPO pipeline, and the sheer scale and liquidity of U.S. capital markets assigning massive valuations.
Stage 2, preservation, built on the dual tax system favoring capital over labor and crucially enabled by the buy, borrow, die strategy to avoid income tax on gains.
And stage 3, perpetuation, locking in dynastic wealth by neutralizing the estate tax through high exemptions, sophisticated trusts, and strategic philanthropy.
All operating within a unique American cultural context that celebrates risk-taking and entrepreneurialism.
And we saw why global rivals like China and India haven't replicated this apex dominance facing political and developmental ceilings, respectively. They lack the full integrated stack.
So the conclusion seems clear. This extreme concentration of wealth in the U.S. isn't just, standard capitalism.
No, the analysis portrays it as something more specific. An accelerating, highly engineered, closed-loop system. It's designed, intentionally or not, to produce precisely this outcome, unparalleled fortunes in the top, shielded from taxation.
Which leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider.
Given how effective buy, borrow, die is, especially that final step-up in basis loophole that permanently erases capital gains tax liability at death.
Right.
What does it mean for the future structure of wealth and inequality in the U.S. when the very apex of wealth, those multi-hundred-billion-dollar fortunes we discuss, is now overwhelmingly controlled by first-generation founders?
Founders whose trillions of dollars in collective gains, generated through stock appreciation, have largely never been subject to income tax.
And whose chosen method of wealth transfer, using this very system, ensures that tax liability will likely be forgiven forever rather than paid by their heirs.
It suggests a future where wealth concentration might accelerate even faster, compounding largely outside the tax system altogether.
It's a profound question about the sustainability and fairness of a system designed for accelerating untaxed concentration at the very top, something for you to mull over.